and all they talked about was rules and laws and all this other stuff. And I was like, I can't do this. I was a week and a half close to joining the Amish church, and I pulled the plug. I said I can't do it. Honestly, I think for me it boils down to choices. Like you have a choice of, staying and getting into this and being miserable. On the other hand, I had left for 3 months. Granted, I had gone to a different Amish community, but I had seen something better. And if you want something better bad enough, you'll do something about it. I'm actually really happy to be alive now. I don't think there's ever been a better time to be alive than now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want this to be like an all official or anything like that, but like I mean, this is stuff that I've even been curious about as far as like your life. I mean, did you want to just kind of tell us where you came from and how, let's say, pre-military, and then maybe lead into that and be as vague or as precise as you want to be about details. I mean, just tell me about who you are and your life and stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I'll start from the beginning. If you got any questions, just hit me with it. I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff I'll miss. But yeah, I grew up in an Amish community in Western Kentucky. Um, Moved around there a little bit. We ended up buying my grandfather's place. Had a mum farm there. My dad did construction. That's how I got started in construction. Um, that guy, I still say it to this day. That guy's still the best at any of that I've ever seen. Um, but that's how I got my start in that. Grew up trained some horses on the side, stuff like that. It's kind of how I got into that whole thing, and probably why I appreciate where I'm at now uh, so much. Childhood part of it, there's a lot of it I don't really remember a whole ton of it. So if there's something you want to know about it, just ask me questions about it because it might spark my memory. Um, but not a whole ton of that I would even remember to get into much anymore. To be quite honest with you, it's a lot of that's pretty vague at this point.
Was
Um,
it like, I mean, was it a nice childhood though? I mean, did your family get along? Did you guys, I mean, what was it like there? Was it dominated by the Amish cult? Like, obviously it was by Amish culture, but I mean, like, what was that like? I mean, you guys have fun on a farm.
um, Well, it kind of depends, I guess, what year you would ask about. From the time I was born until I was 5, my dad was mostly doing construction. We didn't do a whole lot of home. We get into a bunch of stuff and get into trouble. We had a lot of fun, just doing stuff 5-year-olds would do. And then we moved after that. It was pretty good up until that point, and then we moved, and things changed a little bit, not a whole ton. We'd still get out and do stuff kids would do, and uh, actually, honestly, didn't work that much, to be quite honest, for an Amish kid. Not that I remember, at least. We start building stuff when I was 5, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, somewhere in there, and I just build everything, drive my mom nuts. But that was when we lived about a quarter mile from our cousins back there, so they were pretty close by. We'd have a pretty good time with them. It was Now, when it comes to family life, that changed as we got older. It seemed as my parents had more kids and got more stressed out and stuff like that. You'd get beat on quite a bit more, that kind of things.
Is it like, do you
That's
think
just kind of
so?
how it worked.
Do you think that's something about Amish, the Amish themselves? Like, do you think that it's a matter of like it was rougher because you had your other siblings around you, or do you think that there's this pressure to keep having children, and that Amish people kind of have more children than what they should, and they can't really divvy out their love as much as they should, so then they all of a sudden have to have this super structured lifestyle to control everything?
I think that's pretty much how it goes. Because if you're not able to emotionally, financially, whatever it is, provide for your kids, and you're still having all of them, like I don't know if they're pressured to have kids. I don't remember that side of it, but I mean, heck, if you ain't got TV, what else are you gonna do? And then you end up with all all these kids. And so you can't pay attention to very many of them. You kind of got to either you're gonna have to pick and choose or come up with a super strict like regimented way to do things. And I remember as a kid, it would go from uh, before there was a bunch of us around, we'd get disciplined like normal. Um, we wasn't too bad, and then later on, it was kind of like you get into something and just you know beat your butt real quick and move on kind of deal. Um, but I don't know. I'd say there's some things that played into it with the Amish church and the way they do things, but I'd say a lot of it had to do with if you got that many kids, what are you gonna do? Like you don't have enough for yourself at that point, much less 11 kids. And so I'd say
Yeah.
I have some pretty fond memories from growing up, but there was parts of it that were pretty horrific, to be quite honest with you, without going into too much detail with that.
Yeah.
Which I don't mind going in detail with it either. I just
Yep.
I'm not sure what you put on here and that kind of thing. So
No, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing is I want to hear about people's lives, and I want you to talk about anything you're comfortable with. Like, I mean, that
okay,
it's not about me at this point. It's about telling your story, and yeah, I mean, tell me anything you want to tell me.
I gotcha. All right. Um, I mean, it's like I was saying, a lot of it's pretty good. I still have some pretty good memories. Like my dad he started us out hunting. Gosh, 4, 5, 6 years old, something like that. And we go hunting with him. That was some of the best times of my life. And he was actually good enough at shooting, which I'm not saying, the army was that good at teaching people to shoot. But when I went to, he taught me well enough that they didn't have to teach me anything when I went in basic training. They actually had me in basic training when I was there's a couple guys couldn't pass, and they had me teach them how to shoot on the range. And I still remember that. And I was like, and they asked me how'd you learn to shoot? I was like, well, my dad was an Amish guy. He taught us to shoot when I was 5. And it's like, well, he did a good job at it. So, and I actually told him about that, and he wouldn't admit it, but he was pretty proud of it.
I had some. I actually had some of the opposite experiences when I would like work with people or have team members that grew up with guns or something like that, and like their
Yeah,
dad or granddad taught them how to shoot and taught them a bunch of bad practices. You know what I
yep,
mean? And
yep.
they didn't actually sit down and teach them good skills, and then you have to try to break that and get them to relearn and everything. And some of the best ones were the ones that had never touched a firearm before,
Oh yeah,
and they were
yeah.
teachable, and you could actually instruct them then. But
Oh
anyway,
yeah.
that's a
Well,
side.
yeah. Yeah, I mean you're absolutely right too. But yeah, that was kind of the I guess kind of the gist of my childhood, and then we moved when I was 11. We moved to my grandpa's old place. We had a mum farm there, so my dad was, having to manage that and do construction at the same time. Trying to provide for a family with 11 kids. Um, um, so things got pretty stressful then. Um, and not to gosh, I don't really, there's not parts from my childhood that still bother me. I just don't want to go too much in detail to, I guess, maybe expose people. But I mean, to put it simple, I still have scars on my body from things back then. So we'll put it
Yeah,
that way.
like discipline, like disciplinary measure type things, or
Disciplinary measures that turned into an all-out. Yeah, I don't really. There's really no way to word it. Like angry people doing whatever they want to kids, basically because they're angry. Um, it was a probably about 5 years there. It was a pretty terrible time of our lives there. It was rough, and I'm not saying that as in I'm hating on it, anything like that. That's long since gone. But I mean, it's a fact of how I grew up. Um, it's definitely not a way I would ever, if I ever thought I would get to that point, I wouldn't even have kids. Man, it's you're dealing with kids. Like you can't do that. Like that, it stays with them forever in some way, shape, or form. But there's a couple years there that were pretty horrendous, honestly. Um, but
do you think that that was something that was kind of, I don't know, was it pretty common in the community for parents to be that way with their kids, or do you remember seeing other parents who were really loving with their kids? And I'm not trying to get to a certain thing. I'm just like we left the Amish when we were very young. I mean, I have my own experiences coming up through kind of almost like a Mennonite culture, but
Yeah.
not so much the Amish culture, I guess.
Well, for the most part, I don't remember ever seeing any Amish people being loving with their kids. Maybe, and I went to New York for about 3 months there, one time when things got real bad at home. And some of my aunts and uncles up there did pretty well with their kids, and it seemed like they're actually pretty loving with them. But where I grew up at, it was more of a now I wouldn't say you saw a ton of people just out and out beating their kids, but then again, that might have been hidden. There's a lot of things that were hidden there. Now you definitely would expect to probably I don't know I would just an estimation half of them probably go over the top with disciplining their kids. But so I would say well, my childhood might have been on a little bit more of extreme side in the community I grew up in, but I'm not going to say it was completely uncommon. Um, like I've since heard of, people that have kind of gone through the same thing. It's like, man, I never knew that. So I guess they hide it pretty well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that's actually something. I mean, I've known you for what, going on 8, 9 years now, something like that.
Yeah.
And I haven't. I mean, that's actually something that I haven't really heard anything about. I mean, I knew you had a rough time growing up, or there were periods of it, but I never knew any details about it.
Yeah. And back when I was in Ohio for that year or whatever, when I first met you, I probably wouldn't have talked about it either. Um, or I would have, back then I probably would have still made an excuse for why it happened. Um, but now, I mean, I'll talk about it. Other than I really don't want to sit here and name names because some of it's not my story to tell. So, um, but yeah, there were times of it that were great. There were times of it that absolutely sucked, and I think it was partly driven by cultural dynamics and another part that really went into it. Not only did my dad not handle stress very well, but um, he was kind of between a rock and a hard place with the church. I think like there was things he said when I was growing up that let me know like this guy actually does not fully believe in what he's doing. And then you get stuck, and you're stuck because I mean, heck, you're married with 11 kids and you're doing what's expected of you. You feel stuck. It's mentally challenging, and I'm not making excuses for him or anybody else, but it's like that was my first experience, I guess, with cultural and religious, like just culture and religion just hurting people, man. And that was which that's long since gone and over with, done and over with, but it kind of stuck with me. It's like, man, like this happened partially because of this, like, and not an excuse, and you should still take full responsibility for your actions, but at the same time, it's like you put yourself in a situation like that. What do you expect is going to happen?
And then did your church or whatever, I mean, so kind of in the Mennonite community, there was a bunch of, you have to kind of break your child's will teachings that went around in, like the 90s. We were kind of out of it by the 2000s or so, but I mean, I'm sure it still ran around this, it had, had its effect or whatever in the culture long after that. But I mean, is that kind of a similar thing maybe that you would have experienced at home, would have been that whole trying to break your will type of thing? I mean, would there have been that type of teachings going around?
Yeah, probably. I can't give you any specifics per se because I kind of grew up under a rock and that's all I knew. As kind of a yeah, that's probably pretty darn close to what you could have expected. And even if they wouldn't have known that's what they're doing, that's probably um more of what they were after, I guess. That's kind of what that culture and that religion, I would say, it kind of bred that quite a bit. Um, with them coming right out and saying it, probably not. And I was so young that I don't really know. But if I were to look back on it, I would say, yeah, um, that's probably pretty close to what it would have been.
And what about like, was your community pretty secluded out there? As far as I know, it's down in Kentucky. Like up here where I live, the Amish community is pretty large, and it seems to be a little bit different because it's actually intermingling with the rest of society in a way. I guess
Yeah,
kind of keeps them, some of them anyways, kind of seems to keep them up. I don't know, just more culturally fluent, if you want to call it that way. I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah,
But like, I know that there's some communities that can be pretty isolated where they can kind of do whatever they want just because, I mean, there's nobody there to tell them any different.
yeah. Yeah, they were probably not as secluded as, let me think. Do you remember the beard cutting ordeal in Ohio a while back? Yeah, so they're probably not as secluded as those people, but they were still pretty secluded. Um, I don't
Yeah.
think there was any rules against it, but you were kind of expected to like keep your distance to a certain degree. Um, like which my dad did construction, so he was probably more socially, not nearly as socially awkward as some of them would have been. Um, but we had people that we worked for in Southern Illinois that they would start coming out about every week and hanging out with us, helping us out, stuff like that. And I think my parents caught quite a bit of flack from the church over that one. But I don't think there's any specific rules about it. It's just like you were expected to kind of keep to yourself at least somewhat. Um, and things do happen out there that get swept under the rug quite a bit that the law never picks up. Um, and the sheriff uh, loved the guy to death, a great guy, but he would not touch any of that with a 10-foot pole. Um, they were kind of expected to keep their own thing. Now they have a new one in that county now that's like, he told us like I don't care, like I don't care if they have a beard and a straw hat, like the law is the law and they're not going to get away with this stuff. So
I've actually heard that before, that when you have places like the Amish and religion just dominates their life so much that they can almost stand above the law, because if the sheriff is called, then they just let the sheriff know very, very quickly that the church is going to handle it. And there's tons of abuse that goes on, and that, even here, I mean, that happens a lot, is that there's a bunch of abuse that happens, and then if somebody tries to come in, the church is just allowed to handle it. They don't really handle it. They'd give them, some kind of like, Christian counseling, maybe try to send
yep,
them to a different
yep,
community or something like
yep,
that to get some kind of, I don't know what they think it's going to do, remove them from the situation, and then they just continue their abuse out there with a new batch of people.
yep, yep. I actually firsthand experienced some of that stuff. Uh, I was leaving town on a work trip when I was in Fort Campbell. I was leaving town that day, found out about something. Actually had photos from abuse to a kid that's related to me, and I couldn't go out there doing. I knew the sheriff wasn't going to do anything about it. Um, I personally couldn't go out there, um, and I actually ended going in the sheriff's office, sitting down in the morning. I had to leave town. I was like, look, I got to go. Like, I know you guys really aren't going to do with it, but here's the photos from it. Um, and uh, actual photos from like bruises and pretty terrible bruises and abuse to a kid that's related to me. And they went out there. Um, he sent a deputy out, but they stopped at the bishop's house before they go and take care of this. And the bishop, of course, talks him down. Blah blah blah. We'll take care of it. But they did, because I reported it. They did end up going out there with Child Protective Services or something, and they talked it down and claimed that bruises easily, all this other stuff and whatnot. And it's like, well, I mean, if a baby bruises it, like, why are you hitting a baby? Like, it's like it doesn't. Even if a baby bruises easily, like you're, oh my gosh. Anyway,
So
um,
that's how young the relative was. It was just still a baby when that was going on.
he might have been walking, maybe. Like he was,
Infant,
I'd
yeah,
say
like
very,
yeah.
yeah. Um, and so they had I think the Child Protective Services went out and checked on them for like a month and a half and made them do some classes and different things like that. And then a couple months after that, they, moved out, got away from all that. So that,
Yeah,
I'm
there.
sure it's continuing elsewhere.
Yeah, there too much control was coming into their abusive life. Yeah.
Yeah, and here's a crazy part about it, um, is that they actually believe this, that they are martyrs when it comes to things like this, that they are treated more harshly by the law for things like this, when in fact they're almost untouched by the law. And I tell you, this stuff goes way, way, way back. I grew up reading a book called The Martyr's Mirror. Like, we were not allowed to read westerns, anything like that with shooting, killing in it. But we were encouraged to read this thick book of records from, this was back in Europe when I believe the Catholic Church at the time kind of controlled the law and all that, and they were, burning Anabaptists alive, just all sorts of horrific stuff. And we were encouraged to read that, but I think it has cultivated a victim mindset for hundreds of years now. And I think they still live in that. And I kind of feel for them in the sense that when you live in that, man, it's hard to get out of it. Like, you can't, it's almost impossible to have a good life. And so I
Yeah.
kind of feel for it, but at the same time, it's like, man, at some point when you're an adult, maybe you need to sit down and think, this isn't working. Let me do something different.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you there at all. I just wanted to hit on that before we moved on too far. Is that I remember even among the ex-Amish here, and like we went to an church that had a lot of ex-Amish in it, the church, and there that was a big thing, and that victimhood mentality is still permeates that society, like especially even among the ex-Amish, and I think it does Christianity as a whole. I think a lot of them claim persecution anytime the government tries to tell them to do anything. It's all if anybody has a problem with the church, they're just being persecuted. But I still remember them talking about how some of these European churches, I can't remember which ones they were, actually traveled over here to America to kind of apologize for the things that were done to them back in the day. And they were talking about like all the healing and stuff that would come from that. And I know, just kind of as a side note, I remember a lot of them making a big deal out of that and talking about how it's going to lift all these generational things, from them, because trauma experienced even hundreds of, you know 500 years ago or whatever can still
Yeah.
have an effect. And then I still remember thinking that, okay, maybe the rest of society or the rest of America needs to think that with some other things here then too, and maybe try to make some reparations. Then, if you're still feeling the effects 500 years later, but you're saying other people are not from 40 or 50 years ago, then what does that tell you? Like, but anyways.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know that. Like, I knew they came over here from, like, it was a Swiss Catholic church that came over here, but I had no idea like people had that idea on it. But I do know they came over here and they tried to connect with a lot of Amish churches here, and they were turned away. I believe it was a church in Kansas, maybe, that actually accepted them, and it changed the entire dynamic of their church. And they're actually doing really well now. Or they were. I don't know about now. I haven't checked in. Haven't shouldn't be this way, but I haven't cared enough to check in. I guess. But yeah, they basically turn them away because I think a lot of it plays into that. I think if you lose that victim mindset, like, you lose everything you got. I mean, the Amish church lost their victim mindset. They'd have nothing. There'd be nothing left. They'd all be gone tomorrow.
I agree 100%. Yeah, well, there's a thing to be said. Like, I mean, I'm all about people being able to live their lives however they want to live their lives, like completely unmolested by laws and restrictions or whatever. Like, you live your life, but your freedoms have to stop. Like, where our two freedoms come together, that's our boundaries. You can live however you want to until you start taking away the freedom of another person, whether it's your children, whether it's women because of religion, like, regardless of how you cloak it. I don't agree when there can be a culture that is essentially right out in the open in America doing these things to its own people, and being so super abusive, and they're above the law essentially. Like there's some of them that are starting to get found out now by a couple organizations. Like I keep track of a couple things going on, and it's kind of refreshing to see some of them are starting to have to answer for what they're doing. But um, I just don't agree with them being above the law and not having to answer for the ridiculous things that they do to their children, to their women, to and to like preachers doing, it's kind of a perpetual thing. I mean, it's to the men as well. I mean, they
Oh
suffered
yeah.
it growing up from the time they were young because they were kids at one time too, and then they have to be underneath their church authority, and I mean, it's just perpetual. It just sucks.
Yeah, it's never ending, and I think the only way you have of ever ending something like that is exposing it. Not I'm not saying in a hateful way, nothing like that. I just say expose it, let it be what it is, and it loses whatever it's got.
What a lot of people face when they try to expose it. This is your thing, and I don't want to keep cutting in on you.
No,
But a lot of people that try to expose it because of our background, because people are supposed to remain submissive to the church, and kids are supposed to be quiet, be seen, not heard type of thing. And you're kind of literally beaten into submission, right? Well, then
oh
when
yeah,
people actually try to speak up and actually try to expose it, they are portrayed as being hateful, bitter troublemakers, because they're acting in a way that nobody's supposed to inside that community. So
yeah,
as soon as somebody starts speaking up about it, you're automatically labeled as, well, you're just bitter, you're just hurt, you're just vengeful, you're just full of hate. Like, people get called that, and then finally these people do get angry, and then it's like, then they up see, look, they're acting out of the wrong spirit, and it's like,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I don't know, like I personally haven't looked into that one so much. I've taken a back seat to so much of this stuff here lately. It's just I want nothing to do with it. And don't get me wrong, I'll sit here and talk about it all day. I don't care, but it's barely even a part of my life anymore. And it will be. I'm not sure I'll I'll get there again, but right now I'm at a point where I'm almost so like agnostic almost in a sense that I, I don't know. I'm good. I'm good right here for now. So that's sometimes I don't. I mean, it's not. I don't even want to bury my head in the sand and just. I want nothing to do with it. But yeah, that's kind of the gist of that's how I grew up. That's where I grew up in. But I do believe that religion and that restriction, and I think above all, hiding things, I think made things worse than anything else. Like you can take um, uh, the culture, whatever. But I think hiding things within, sweeping things under the rug and hiding things and not exposing things for what they are. I think that probably hurts more people than anything else. But whatever. We at the end of the day, like we all sit here and like we judge each other for things we've done, but at the end of the day, every one of us has done something crazy and something stupid. And I don't know, find a safe place to talk about it, get it out in the open so it's over with and doesn't hang on to your life. Like deal with it now, and maybe a little bit of personal responsibility would probably help with that too. So
just a little bit, like, so people don't always have to keep dealing with your hurts and triggers through life. Like,
yeah,
have to take a little bit of responsibility to make it better, I guess, on
yeah,
your own. Yeah.
yeah. Might not have been your fault. And that's not always your fault, but it is kind of, at least I look at it this way, as my responsibility to take care of it. Um, but that's me. You were talking about um living your lives without law getting in the way. I would say that, like, I actually agree with that, almost on to that same extent as like live your lives, live the religion you want to live in, believe what you're going to believe. The only thing I guess I have left that I live by in that sense anymore is I do what I want to do or what I think I should do as long as I'm not hurting somebody else. That is my stopping point, and I'm terrible at it. I'm learning to get better at it, all that stuff, because I mean that's how you grew up. but I'm learning to get better at. But like at the point you're hurting somebody, that's the point, man. It's like no, okay, and because people go like, if you don't have a religion or you don't have the law, how do you know where to stop? I was like, well, are you hurting somebody? No, okay, it's that simple. If you're hurting somebody, stop, including yourself, probably.
Well, I
I
mean,
mean, that's
too,
the thing.
it depends. I mean, even, and this is once again getting into a discussion that this is, I don't know, maybe it's meant to be this, I don't know, but even if somebody wants to sit in their house and smoke their life away like meth, or whatever, I mean, I'm still
Yeah,
kind of like, I'm not saying that families can't have interventions and that they couldn't be removed from the situation and maybe taken to rehab. But this whole thing of locking people up for 5, 10, 15 years
yep,
because they're sitting in their own home smoking meth isn't helping
yeah,
anybody, including the person smoking meth.
yep, yeah, yeah. That's the person that helps the least. To be quite honest with you, it's like I don't care. I mean, if you go like I'm gonna feel for you if you go hurt yourself with these things, like we all do to some extent. We've got something we hurt ourselves with, but at the end of the day, it's your choice. If you're not hurting somebody else, leave them alone. Like that's that's your choice to make, and you're gonna figure it out or you're not. And at the end of the day, you're gonna live with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are one of those, drug addicts or whatever, which actually most of the time, rather than them just, being shitty people, normally there's a reason why they ended up doing that, and if, children are in the mix and it's affecting the kids or whatever, then yeah, you absolutely remove the children from it. And you know, I still suffer, like I'm still a little bit conflicted in my own head on whether you should actually go in there and forcefully remove the person doing it to himself, or if you do forcefully remove them from that situation, then it should be to a place that ultimately believes in restoration and not punishment.
Yeah. Well, I'll put it to you this way: if um, and maybe this is a terrible way to look at it, but I would almost say, if it was my brother, I'd probably go get him, and try to help him out. But at the point you're falling all over yourself and you're losing yourself in the process of helping somebody else, that might be an indicator to back off too. But I just don't think that it's the law's responsibility to to intervene in that. I think if we put the time and money and resources into rehab or whatever the heck else you want to put it into to help people out instead of putting them in jail, I think we'd be a heck of a lot better off. I just don't. I mean, I just don't care. Like if it's on your property, you're not hurting somebody else. Like that's not my business. That's none of my business. It's none of nobody else's
And
business either.
yeah, and I agree 100%. And a lot of people think that in order to implement things like that, that we have to like spend more money. And I'm like, no, because we're already spending it by having a built-up police force, by going in there and the equipment that it takes and the training and everything for police officers. And then you're throwing them in jail where they're being housed full time, being fed. They have showers. They have all of these things. So you're already spending the money. You're already have spending the money for the infrastructure, for the people, the guards, the police. Like why can't they just be switched from a prison guard to a rehab officer, or you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's just more, I think, reallocating the money, not raising more money. But
Yeah.
I
No.
think
Yep.
that's the
Yep.
thing, is that the money is just too good there, and that's why they don't do it.
Yeah. And tell me this, like if alcohol is in a sense is kind of can do the same thing to your life, but we don't jail alcoholics. Like like it just doesn't make any sense. None of that makes any sense to me.
And then there's plenty of drug addicts out there that are addicted to legal drugs.
Yeah.
The this epidemic that's kind of making its rounds around the United States. I mean, that's essentially created by legal drugs. I mean
Oh
that's
yeah.
why we're in the middle of this epidemic. Not to mention them kind of introducing drugs to begin with back in like the 70s and stuff, or whatever it was, 60s and
Yep.
70s. But then all of a sudden, you have legal drug addicts that remain functional, and I think that some of that can even be because of the stigma that we place on people. Like if we brand somebody as less than acceptable because they're addicted to illegal drugs, that actually has a dark attachment that it places to the person. Where if you would take that labeling off of them, I actually think that there's even more people that are addicted to illegal drugs that could remain functional because they are not branded as being the underbelly of society,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. Like they're kind of
Oh yeah.
living up to the labels that are placed on them.
Yeah, yeah, there's probably a lot of truth in that because some of those the legal drugs have, I mean, they're just as bad or worse. Like I had, man, I had two surgeries. They put me on oh, I forget what it is, some kind of opioids. I don't remember exactly what it was. But that stuff, like by the time I was, over and pain was over with, and I was off of them, I was like, man, I could have gotten addicted to this real quick. Like, and nobody would have thought any worse about it, and like any less about me, just simply because, I mean, it was a legal drug. But I mean, it would just been just as bad for me in my life as something else would have been. So I'd say I'd probably agree with you on that. But yeah, I think it's time. Well, I mean, it's time a long time ago to, do away with all of that. Like I think they just did away with you can't. I think federally they just did away with the whole marijuana thing finally, maybe something like that. I don't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember. I think they're trying to do that, which I think that's 100% the way to go because, I mean, yeah, that gets into a whole other rabbit trail, but you're forcing people into closer proximity with the more harsh drugs by forcing them to go to actual drug dealers that may have, cocaine and meth and heroin and all kinds of stuff there,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You might as well legalize it. Make sure the product you're putting out is half decent.
Yeah, exactly. At least give, make it so that even if the government doesn't manufacture it, at least if it's not, having to be cooked up in a trailer park somewhere, then maybe the people who get it are not going to be, ingesting household cleaners or something. Maybe they could
Yeah,
get a more pure version that might not be quite as harmful. I don't know. I mean, I know I
yeah.
don't have all the answers to it, but I just know that whatever we're doing now just doesn't work. So we have to change something. But
Well, it
um,
hasn't worked for what, 50 years now or longer, something like
longer than that,
that.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely longer than that. What forced you, or what led to you leaving your family and kind of? I mean, how old were you, and what kind of led up to you leaving?
Yeah, I was 18 and a half at the time, I believe. There's some things leading up to it. I had just turned 18. I think I was basically of the opinion at the time that, all Amish people were bad. I basically hated all of them. I was super rebellious as a kid, as a 17-year-old. Excuse me. And then I think it's me and my dad got into it. I think I was just over 18, and some things happened there that where I couldn't stay. But I think kind of in the back of my head, I knew that like leaving at that point in time would have been bad because I would have been leaving bitter. Um, and I ended up going to New York for 3 months and lived with family up there, and they were really good to me, and they actually had quite a different outlook on Amish and Christianity in general, which they were still Amish, but it kind of I was able to look at it a little bit differently and pick my own path a little bit and um, all that stuff to where I was able to see things slightly differently.
So did you go there before you left the Amish then? Like you were struggling at
Yes.
home, so you decided you would go somewhere else to on your by your own free will, or were you kind of sent there, or how did that go?
So I actually kind of had to fight a little bit to go. When that thing went down between me and my dad, like I knew I couldn't stay, but I kind of had to fight to go. They still didn't want me to go. They were like, you're kind of just running away, which was true. Um, I was kind of running away from it, which I needed to go to get that perspective, and they finally let me go. But the great thing about all this is this actually ended up being a pretty big turning point between me and my dad. And um, um, yeah, I went up there, kind of gained quite a bit of different perspective, and came back, which I knew at one point when I was up there. Um, I knew I could no longer stay. Once I was up there and kind of looked at things differently, but I wasn't bitter at them, anything like that. But I couldn't stay, and I came home knowing I was going to leave. Um, but this kind of plays into maybe things later on in this interview, maybe. But at the time, I still specifically remember actually, and I'm not saying this is where I'm at now, none of that. This is just part of my experience. Is when I was up there, I was so miserable at one point that I basically, I had, um, there's a guy I kind of grew up with back home where he was more like a grandpa to me, but he was not Amish, and he would talk. He was a Southern Baptist, and he talked to me about what he believed in and that kind of thing. So I still remember at one point when I was up there, I was so miserable. I finally was like, God, if you're like real, whatever, like I'm turning my, like, I can't do this anymore. Like, whatever, this is yours. And I cannot deny the fact that my life got better. I feel like it probably had a lot more to do with letting go than anything else. Um, but I came home and I knew I no longer believed what they believed, and you can't stay. Like you gotta you know what you know now. You know you cannot believe in this. You know this is trash, and you gotta go along with it and be miserable the rest of your life and hurt others, or you can leave. And I chose to leave. And there were things, of course, leading up to um, that brought me to that decision. But at the point I was finally like, okay, I'm doing it. Like I actually, at the time I wanted to be baptized. I was joining church. It takes like 4 months during the summer, and all they talked about was rules and laws and all this other stuff. And I was like, I can't do this. I was a week and a half close to joining the Amish church, and I pulled the plug. I said I can't do it. Um, and I called actually one of my best friends to this day that has actually left the Amish, was working for this guy that had part-time work, and he rented houses, and he was actually still Amish at the time. My buddy was Amish at the time, and I asked him for this guy's number. All right, maybe he suggested it. I don't remember. Kind of saved my butt. I walked down to the phone shack about a quarter mile down the road. I called him up, and he's like, "Yeah, I got some work. Got a place for you to stay." And 3 days later, I left. So it it worked
Wow.
out. Yeah.
I'm surprised that you at such a young age could think through that so much. Like how you were talking about how you knew you wouldn't be able to put up with it, and you kind of thought through everything almost like a calculated way of like it's either this or I have to leave. I know for some of us, like I think for me, I would have been more under the mentality of like, I would have just left out of just sheer frustration or something like that. But when I was
Yeah.
that young, I don't know how many deep thoughts I would have had about it. You know what I mean? It just,
Yeah.
and that might, expose how ignorant I can be. But it's like I'm
Oh,
just kind of
um,
surprised at the depth of thought you had, I guess.
well, at the time, I'm not going to say there was no bitterness or no frustration. I'm not going to say there was any of that, but that one was way more of a decision than anything else. And it was one of the first, looking back, it's one of the first I made in my life like that. Um, and it was you. Honestly, I think for me it boils down to choices. Like you have a choice of, staying and getting into this and being miserable. On the other hand, I had left for 3 months. Granted, I had gone to a different Amish community, but I had seen something better. And if you want something better bad enough, you'll do something about it. And you may not even logically think about that, but you don't. To me, I didn't have a choice. Like, and as I think it's still a lot of ways. Like I look at life now, it's like if I'm miserable, if something's not working, like do something different. You have to. To me, at least, like the alternative is to live in this pit, and I really don't want to live in a pit. So I'll take
Now,
the hard choice and go.
Now I know you and like some of your friends, I mean, that you have down there, we kind of know them together, but
Yeah.
you guys used to, I don't know if you did specifically, but when you guys would farm, I mean, there was like this steam engine thresher or whatever that would come around and stuff. I mean, so did you
Yeah.
guys like enjoy the lifestyle, but it was like the lifestyle just out, or the other oppression and miserable things you had to deal with just kind of outweighed the lifestyle, or did you just not like any of it at all?
Oh, I love parts of the lifestyle. There were parts of the lifestyle that I absolutely love. My grandpa, but I don't know. I'm kind of surprised you know about the steam engine. That was my grandfather's. And quick story on that before I go on, I got to tell you this. My grandfather died about 5 years ago, and they sold that thing in an estate sale, and it went for more money than I could afford to pay for at the time. And I tracked it down in I think it's Bowling Green, Kentucky at the time, and this guy, it said it needed a new boiler, all this other stuff, and so he sells it to the town of Cumming, Georgia, and they have this big steam engine festival every single year, and they've got this thing all painted up. It's not in working condition anymore. It's all painted up, sits out in the city square, and I went down there. Actually, went down there to with Katie. I think it was over Christmas or something, and I actually went and found that and got pictures of it. And I when I get off of here, I'll send you before and after photos. It was super awesome. My
That's
grandfather
so
was one of
cool.
those rare. Yeah, it's super cool. My grandfather was a rare person. He was very quiet, very well mannered guy for an Amish person, and he honestly, the guy never seemed to judge us, and we loved him, absolutely loved him, and he was an incredible fellow, and got Lou Gehrig's disease and passed away, um, but that's how I got started in all that stuff. I still have me and one of my cousins bought his. Oh man, it's a hit and miss engine. I got to send you photos of that one too, and had that thing completely rehabbed. That we're gonna set it up on an ice cream freezer and all that. So there was. I kind of got off there, but I love that stuff. Like I love farming. Like I love ranching. I love all that stuff. I love the get-togethers we'd have. Like you'd actually get together, whether you were expected to or whatever. So you kind of did it, but either way, if somebody needed help, we'd show up and help them. In that aspect, there were parts of that community of living there that I mean, it was great. But the bad, oh my gosh, far outweighed the good on that one. And there's just no way to stay, and so you kind of have to leave and find your own and build your own little community, I guess. However you decide you want to do that.
So it's kind of one of those things where that type of a lifestyle is possible and it could be done. It just seems like maybe we have to rethink how we would create community, like rather than having it built around the things they're built around now and having this authoritarian mindset, religious, and all of this other garbage that's wrapped up in it. You could possibly have a community and have it actually be nice and decent and good and wholesome, I
I
guess.
think, yeah. I mean, I think it's absolutely possible, but you're going to have to be really careful to keep, and this is super controversial too, but you have to keep religion out of it if you're going to do it. You have to, because every time you build anything with any number amount of people want to attach a government to it, and they want to attach, and generally speaking, that government is going to be run by a religion. So you gotta have to keep them out of it. I think we're tribal by nature. I think we're very tribal by nature. I think it's how we were biologically designed, or at least that's how we live for so long. It's still in our DNA. Um, so I think we're very communal and very tribal. I really do believe that. I think a lot of that was pretty evident through the whole COVID thing and people being isolated. I think we're definitely very tribal or communal, however you want to look at it. But I think you're going to have to keep the government and religion out of it for it to be successful.
Yeah.
Because people, let's say you have somebody or somebody, whoever's running this thing may not even be in it for himself, but he's over here doing it for uh, making up rules and all this other stuff for whatever greater good thing you got going on in your head, and you end up just hurting people, and it just doesn't work. You just drive people out. So as of right now, I don't see a way to do it, but hopefully someday that changes. We'll see.
Yeah. It's something that the change would have to happen in society as a whole. And rather than trying to implement the change through force, through legislation, through law, through, a group of people like just coming together and kind of forcing the changes, something probably that's almost going to have to evolve, like as society would progress. I mean, that's been my whole thing this whole time, is that like I see the change that we need to make. I see, and there's a lot of people that agree, or that I agree with, the change that needs to happen in society, but the way to get there, I think, is the thing that should be so heavily disputed. And even people on the right and on the left think that they have to force their will, and they realize that if they force it, then it's just going to make it worse, because if you force someone to change their mind, you actually haven't really changed their mind. They just,
Yeah.
you've just forced it,
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so it's something where it'll have to be a societal progression, evolution, whatever you want to call it, type of thing.
Yeah. It almost, I think it almost has to but man, that stuff takes hundreds, sometimes even thousands of years to do anything differently. I mean, if you go back thousands of years in the way we live, like some of that stuff is still ingrained into us into this day. Um, and it just takes a long, long time. I don't know that it's doable in my lifetime. I'm not saying it's not, but I don't know that it is.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
uh,
I don't plan on it being that way within my lifetime for sure. I just think that we as humans have to try to move the ball forward as much as we can within our lifetime. Even if you don't, even if you can't get to where, the ultimate end, you still have to try to get there as far as you can in your lifetime. Raise your children to go even further than us, and hopefully we can develop a mindset in our culture to realize that change is good.
yeah,
Right now, we think that change is bad, and that's why you still have people trying to
yeah,
go back to the 50s when they think that, those were the good old days in the United States. And, so people are actually anti change right now. And I think
yeah,
that, along with religion and government trying to be self serving, is kind of stunting the whole change
yeah.
thing.
Yeah, people want to go backwards with it, and I think for me personally, I wholeheartedly disagree with it. Like I used to say I wanted to be born back in the 1800s, just for the fact that that's when, the whole ranching cowboying thing was more of a thing. But I disagree with my younger self now. Like I think, I'm actually really happy to be alive now. I don't think there's ever been a better time to be alive than now. I think there will be a better time, but as of now, for me personally, I'm glad I was born now. I actually have a lot of hope for where we're going. I think anytime you see upheaval and things like stuff, I mean, something's got to change. So, and I've gotten to where, I guess, yeah, deep down, I don't like change still, but I've gotten to where I've seen so many good things come every time there's some change, something good comes out of it, that I've learned to embrace it a little bit. And I think we'll get there. I think we'll be just fine. Um,
Yeah, and I'm not even saying that change is comfortable, because I don't think that it is. I think this, for whatever reason, our human nature, whether it's, past DNA or whatever it is, I don't know, but I saw this thing that says, we as humans were always, oh, how did it say? Something about we will always choose a comfortable hell over an unknown heaven, or something
yeah,
like that.
yeah. Well, I mean, if you go back hundreds, thousands of years when we lived tribally, like change was dangerous. Like change would kill you. And I say that probably plays into it quite a bit. And if you're living tribally, and it probably took quite a bit to push them out. Like you had to be super hungry to make a change, or super this or super that, like because change is so dangerous. Like change will kill you back then. And I think it's just ingrained in us. But that's my thought on it. I'm not a scientist. I'm not any of that, so I don't really know.
No, that's really good. I never thought about that, but no, that makes sense.
I don't know. I don't know that in my lifetime or yours we'll ever get all that out of our DNA, and I don't know that we should, in a sense, get the tribal or communal type thing out of our DNA. But I'd say this: you've gone a lot further on thinking through this stuff than I have, because you're thinking about changing systems when I'm over here learning how to use the system to my benefit and others. So, uh,
I'm literally trying to live my life knowing that that the current systems that we have in place are not necessarily good. They're not necessarily
yeah,
beneficial overall for the human population, but knowing I have to live within them, you still
yeah,
have to live within them, but trying to do as
yeah,
much good and use them in the best way that I know how,
yeah,
even though I realize that they're not necessarily the way they're supposed to be.
yeah, yeah. You almost gotta, if you can't get out of them, at least maybe figure out how to use them for good. Like I wanted to, after I had other plans of doing things before I had surgeries in the military, I was going to get out and do other things, but ended up I'd learning I had to figure out how to use my brain to get ahead instead of just my body because it was just beat the crap. And I'm trying to get into, which I already have a little bit, but trying to figure out how to get into more real estate. But then it kind of hit me. It's like, well, why am I doing this exactly? Like, I got to have a reason for it. But it's like, man, I just want to use, like, now I've gotten to the point where I want to use that system for good and like to be able to, that's my thing. My passion now is to be able to use that to help others out. And I think you almost have to in some sense. It's I almost feel, for myself at least, if I was completely self-serving, which you have to be self-serving to a degree, you got to help yourself out before you help anybody else out. But if you become completely self-serving within that too, like it'll bite you in the butt eventually. Like it'll get you. The system will whack you. I don't know why
Yeah.
it just does it. At least to me.
Well, and I think that a lot of people lose sight of that. Like, so, we had that conversation here last week when we were testing out our internet connections and stuff, and we talked
Yeah.
about that it ultimately has to be about you. And there's a lot of people that would kick back on that and say that that's just selfishness. But I think that there has to be a very fair balance there. That it has to be all about you uh, uh, without taking advantage of another person. Like, so
Yep.
in other words, like I have to take care of my family, I have to take care of my wife,
Yep.
I have to take care of my children while I make it about myself. But if I can't make them suffer, my wife still needs to feel
Yeah.
loved, my children still need to feel loved, they still need to feel like they're cared for and that they have a safe place to be. Even though I realize all the crap that I have to go through, I need to focus on myself without shorting them of the things that they
Yeah.
need as well. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep. You're absolutely right, and people, you are right. The people will say that's selfish, and excuse me, the culture and religion we grew up in, and stuff like that. I mean, religion in general will tell you it's bad to be selfish, but I would venture to say that if you're not selfish to some degree, you cannot help anyone else out. So, like, I mean, if I'm not physically fit, I can't physically help somebody else out. If I'm not mentally fit, I can't help them out in that area. If I'm not emotionally fit, I can't help them out. If I'm not financially fit or whatever, however you want to put it, if I'm not fit or not good in that area, I can't help them out. So why would I not be a little selfish first um and make sure I'm good to where I can help others? Because in the end, that's the goal, is to help others as much as you can. And but I can't do it if my own bucket's empty. I can't do it if I haven't taken care of myself. And that sucks. That's the hard part. That's putting yourself first to be able to help others, but you got to do it.
no, you're absolutely right on that, though. I mean, I think that more people need to realize that, and you can't blame them for not realizing it because as you kind of touched on there, it's so deeply ingrained in our society and in our religious system and even in our like economical system. I mean, you have to sacrifice for king and country and God and
Yep.
your family, and like, I mean, it's all about sacrificing for everybody other than yourself. And
Yep.
then when somebody comes around and says no, you need to be a bit selfish, then people are like, what? Like, you're crazy, you're being
Yeah.
self-centered, you're egotistical, you're whatever.
I I mean honestly, I think it's the most loving thing to do. To do that, to make sure you're good to where you can help others out. Because I think it's pretty self-centered of me to think I can help anyone else out if I don't. Um, I mean, that's to me, it's just arrogant. That's me though. Like I'm speaking for myself. I'm not talking about anybody else here. But to me, like, it would just be absolutely ludicrous to think that I could help anyone else out without making sure I'm good. Like, you can't give nothing if you ain't got nothing. Like, it's
Yeah,
impossible.
yeah, and if you want to actually see the changes happen that you believe in, uh, I mean, I know that we need to work on informing other people and bringing ideas to other people. Like, I mean, that's why I do the podcast, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I'm trying
yeah,
to get the information out there. I'm trying to share people's stories. I'm trying to give people a different perspective on life and maybe not be so judgmental about different people's experiences and stuff like that. But if we do want to be an open society in that way, then it does ultimately have to start with you. And that is the quickest way to enact that type of change, because then if I make that change in myself, then my children are going to see that, hopefully
yep,
do the same
yep,
thing within themselves, but then go a step further than I did. Because they don't have to deal with some of the crap that I did when I was a kid. They don't have to overcome some of the nasty personality traits that I've developed. Then hopefully they can become better, and then my grandchildren will do even more than them, and so on and so forth. And eventually it'll pay off, hopefully, and it'll
oh
be
yeah,
a more lasting change than sitting there trying to force it on people, in my
yeah.
opinion.
I was when we were up that weekend, man. I tell you, that was super good. Me and Katie both talked about that for a while. It's like y'all were quite different with your kids, and your kids were like super respectful and like I don't know, it was, and but they're still kind of their own little people, and you don't see kids being their own little people. And so that was pretty
I
refreshing to see.
That's super refreshing to hear, because I'm like, we also see the other side of it and feel how difficult it is to actually do that, because when you come from our background, it is much easier for the parent to actually break the will of the child. So I think
Yeah,
that I
yeah,
think that people that do that are actually self-centered. It's not about the children, it's about themselves.
it's
Because
yeah,
when you take care of a child that has their own will, has their own emotions, and they're allowed to have it, it's tough on the parent, because you don't have control.
yeah,
And now I do know that they do have to have a level of discipline in their life, but you have to somehow steer them in the right direction without breaking their will. And that's where I struggle so hard, because I am a little bit more of the strict parent. Not that my wife isn't, but my wife is just so compassionate. She's just so loving, and she does that with our kids, and she just has a patience and a grace with them that I just simply don't have. Uh, but
yeah,
but I do see, then I don't believe in raising kids the way that I even believed in raising them when we first had them, which is actually why I'm
yeah,
glad we didn't have more.
yeah.
Because I actually don't believe that I raised children properly when we first started having kids. But now seeing how they can develop, having their own personalities and stuff, I mean, it's actually the harder route to.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably harder. It's much easier to just beat a kid and get it over with. The way we grew up. So, but here's the thing: if you kids, I don't have kids, and I'm speaking out of no experience here, but I would assume if I was allowed to have somewhat of my own personality at least as a kid, I wouldn't have spent so many years of my 20s trying to figure out who I was. Like I would. Yeah, but that would have made that experience quite a bit easier, I think, at least.
Yeah, no
But
kidding. Yeah, it was my 30s for me. I mean, I think I was trying to learn things in my 30s that I should have learned when I was at home under the care of a parent. And I'm not, I hope my parents are still alive and I love them very much. I hope they don't, take offense to any of it, but they were doing the best they could with what they had
oh
too.
yeah, yeah,
But I feel like I was trying to learn things in my 30s that I should have worked through and processed through as a child when I was at home.
yeah. Well, I tell you what, you're probably right, and I think that fits most of us to some extent. But you're lucky you found it in your 30s, because I'm telling you, I still know people that find it in their 50s, find it in their 60s, never find it anything. And so the fact that you actually found it and you're looking into it is that's you're pretty lucky, or you think a lot, one or the other. So
Well, I
Uh,
appreciate it, but you're still younger than I. I don't know. Have you even hit 30 yet? I mean, like you're
no, not
realizing these
yet.
things. Yeah, you're realizing these things, maybe close to 10 years younger than me. So I would say you have to give yourself credit on that one as well.
I I consider myself lucky, and I'm thankful to have a lot of good people in my life that have helped to bring that about. And I'm lucky to have had enough hardships in my life to have pushed me to that point. Because I can sit here and think all day and come up with a plan of how to do things and know what's going on, but if I never make the choice to make my life better, nothing happens. And I'm actually thankful now that I've gone through some of the things that I've gone through that's pushed me to this point. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. I really wouldn't. I'm a hard-headed person, and sometimes it takes a lot to get me there. And so I'm thankful for some of the beat downs I've had in life, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, it would be nice if we didn't have to learn that way, but a lot of us do, unfortunately. And that whole old adage of, some people learn by seeing, some people learn by hearing, and some of us just have to pee on the fence ourselves.
I haven't heard that one, but that's true.